Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today we are continuing our series, Connecting the Dots. Okay, the basic idea of the series is to look at the ideas that we've been talking about and see connections between them. It's a way of exploring the ideas in more depth, and by connecting the ideas to seeing what connections exist, go to a deeper level. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. This is going to be highly interactive. So feel free to type exclamation mark in chat whenever you want to speak. I will have some kind of a structure because I want to keep, I want to cover as much as possible. So here is my plan. The last week we had an incredible meetup. I just loved it. And we had all these ideas that people put forth. So I want to list those ideas first. And I'm going to also open the table for people to put in any more ideas on the table. And then we are going to start exploring connections between ideas. Okay, so that's the plan. So let me just read out the ideas for you first. They are there on the Meetup page, so you can go to the Meetup page if you want to do that. Joe, can you do one thing? Can you just go to the Meetup page and cut and paste all those ideas in the chat? Thanks. So the ideas are that we had from my notes. So you are welcome to add any ideas, even if we are not discussed it before. First one is OODA Loop. That is John Boyd's idea. That was spoken of by many people. And since then, we had this incredible presentation by Chuck Spinney. If you missed it, you have to watch it. It's a presentation on evolutionary epistemology. How do you keep updating your concepts to shape and be shaped by the changing world? Okay, that's what you're trying to do while increasing your capacity for independent action. And he has this whole presentation that is really John Boyd's original presentation, presented by him. And it was just incredible. He spoke for 2 hours, 45 minutes, and it was all amazing. Next is the idea, Carl Jung's idea of individuation. This is the greatest idea of Carl Jung. So there is the idea of self, which is the totality of who you are. And individuation is a process of going towards that. Okay, so that is Carl Jung's idea of individuation. Then there is the idea of facing fear, the idea of how much fear stops you and the importance of facing it. Whenever there is a negative emotion, our natural instinct is to evade it, to go away from it. This is all about going towards it. Next is Stoicism, the idea of dichotomy of control and other ideas on Stoicism. Then you got the idea of conscious interiority. This is the idea of Julian Jaynes, where you, instead of being a stimulus response machine, so instead of stimulus going here and you responding, you put a mental space where you consider what is coming in, both from external surroundings, your memories, your emotions, your intuitions, and then you manipulate them, you work with them, you see contradictions in them, and then you plan out various things that you could do and respond based on that. Essentially, that's the concept of the cogitative sense or rational faculty that we're going to be talking about this Sunday at 12 o'clock. So that is conscious interiority. It is a profound concept. It's probably one of the deepest concepts and most, not just deepest, but it is deepest, and it's a very simple way and powerful way of understanding consciousness or self-consciousness, the heart of the leverage that we have on our life. Then there's the concept of definite purpose. This is from the book Outwitting the Devil that Chase and Alex covered. Power of definite purpose versus drifting. Then it's order and chaos. That is Jordan Peterson's core idea of living on the edge with 1 foot in order and 1 foot in chaos. Then there is systems thinking. We looked at systems thinking from Buckminster Fuller, from many people. So that's a very core idea of thinking in terms of systems, looking at what is inside the system and what is outside the system and how they relate to each other. Next one is form follows function. That's my favorite idea from Louis Sullivan. Now, conscious interiority is now giving competition to that. So but it's form follows function is something that I've used for a very long time. It's a profound idea. Next one is our digital life. This is understanding that this is a short form. This is understanding that there are different stages of technology. There is the oral stage, there is the scribal stage, there is a print stage, there is the electric or television state, and now there is a digital state. These are the modes of technology that we are using, and understanding how it enhances some of our senses, how it brings emphasis on certain faculties as opposed to others. For example, in TV, kind of prioritizes imagination and fantasy over memory, whereas digital or print focuses on memory. So that is understanding of that. Again, we're going to have an amazing thinker, Merlin Donald, who has done fundamental work on this, coming and talking to us on Sunday at 5 p.m. He looks at the entire cultural history of human beings as being divided into 3 stages. Mimetic, which is imitative, mostly this is like monkey see, monkey do. This is, a lot of the information is carried through body language. It's all about that as being the foundation. And then there is the mythic stage, which is the oral stage of telling stories. Kind of beginning of religions is in that. Mythology is there. Carl Jung has done a lot of work on that. And then there is the theoretic stage or technology supported stage, where you have the entire sequence of things like writing and printing and television and the computer and the internet and what it does to human civilization and to how each of us operate. Even when we are at a later stage, the previous stages continue to be operative, and you keep on revisiting them. So for example, television is a throwback to the mythic stage. Digital in some ways is throwback partly to print, partly through the scribal stages. So it is bringing up kind of more primitive things as well. So it's very interesting to understand all of that. So that's on the digital life. And there is the idea of cybernetics. That's the issue of control systems. This is like, you can think of it as system 2 as being controlling the system 1, kind of sitting on the top of it. And the principles of control, of how, or direction, or regulation, self-regulation. And there is the value of curiosity, which is which is a hallmark of all these meetups. We're exploring so many different fields. There is the 4 functions that I have talked about, based largely on Carl Jung's ideas and Daniel Kahneman's ideas. There is the difference between individuality and socialness, that we are individuals and we are social at the same time, and the conflicts that arise from that and integrations of that. Lots of ideas from Jordan Peterson that we discussed. We talked about the value of attention. We talked about Bayes' rule, the importance of updating your premises. We talked about virtues. We talked about principles as a way of conceptually summarizing your understanding of what is important that serves as a guide for your action. We talked about the concept of sense of life, which is an implicit philosophy that guides you. And we talked about the right brain and the left brain. So these are some of the ideas that we talked about. Now, we are now going to try to connect these ideas. Okay, now my style of connecting it is visual. So I would put up a diagram and I would start drawing all of these things and start connecting all of those things. And that's what I ended up doing last time. But I want to hear how you would connect these ideas. So any comments about connecting? You can put any two, you can pick any two of these ideas, or you can put any one of your additional ideas and try to connect two ideas. Any similarities between ideas, any kind of relationships of what is more fundamental, what is more derivative, similarities or how they complement each other. So I'm going to now open the floor. If you'd like to talk about how you connect ideas or how you see any of these ideas as connected, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark, and we can begin that way. All right. All right. So Joe, go ahead.
So I just, there was something that had come up the other night, and actually Andrew had brought it up. And I'm actually looking for my notes feverishly at the moment, but I can't find them. But it had the idea with Jordan Peterson, where we're constantly creating new problems and how that would relate to OODA Loop.
Mm-hmm.
Those were two concepts that I thought were actually interesting, but I forget the exact scenario that Roger was talking about on Thursday evening.
Okay.
But I don't know if it's maybe chaos, just mapping chaos into the OODA Loop. But I thought that would be an interesting connection.
Mapping chaos into OODA Loop?
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what it is, because if we're constantly creating a sense or a new problem,
yes,
with every problem that we solve, then how that fits into decision making in the OODA Loop. But I do remember.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that. OODA Loop and chaos, right? So say let's take order and chaos as one idea and OODA Loop as the other idea. And let's see how those two are connected. So anybody wants to say anything on that is welcome. So how does Jordan Peterson always talks about order and chaos. He talks about the importance of living on the border of order and chaos, with one foot in order and one foot in chaos. How is that idea of Jordan Peterson related to John Boyd's idea of the OODA Loop? So anybody wants to comment? Okay, so let me go ahead and comment. Joe, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I would just say the idea of orientation and how you actually view the problem is the connection, in the sense that if you're constantly reorienting and how you process new information, that is a way of dealing with both order and chaos.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So orientation is basically the order that you have achieved. So in the diagram that I had, order was, when you do the creative induction and you achieve a orientation, that is the highest point of order that you have. And then you don't stop there. You actually start acting based on that. And the moment you start acting based on that, you start to get feedback from the world. And now you are open. So you've created the maximum order. And with that order, you are actually facing the world, which has chaos in it, because there is a lot of things that you don't know. So you are actually going out You're kind of preparing yourself, you're arming yourself in your city with the best tools that you have, the best weapons that you have, and then you're going out into the forest. Okay, to use to combine it with Jordan Peterson. Okay, and then you are doing all this, interaction with the world, making the observations, then coming back to your city, saying, okay, what did I learn from my trip out there in the chaos? And reworking, taking apart all your tools, putting them back together, orienting, and going out again. So this is actually describing not just, see, when Jordan Peterson talks about it, there is the city and there is the forest. The city is the order, forest is the chaos. What Boyd adds is that he's actually talking about the process of saying, you go out there, learn from your experience, and you come back and then you rework all your tools. So you actually rebuild the city. So it's a far more dynamic way of looking at it, because the city is not really a city. It is continuously changing. So it is, because when you think of a city, it seems like a fixed thing, whereas Boyd's ideas are far more dynamic than that. Okay, so that was one. Now, Hi Hello says, I think these ideas seem to be about things you can control. Okay, so now let's look at, just take this idea of what you can control. Okay, and then see. Go ahead, Becky.
May I comment on Joe?
Please.
I also think that having order in chaos, 1 foot in order, 1 foot in chaos, having the negative feedback in the OODA loop helps you bring that chaos and incorporate it into your order. But if you have that positive feedback where your error is differing from your error of reality and what you expected differ greater, then you're losing your foothold and being succumbed by the chaos.
Beautifully put. This was a major point that Chuck made when he was talking about the OODA loop, that there are negative feedbacks and there are positive feedbacks. Negative feedback is to actually confront the fact that whatever you are thinking of, there is a mismatch between that and reality, and taking that on board. Whereas we tend to have confirmation bias, where we actually do not observe things that conflict with us and just look at things that will support. And that's a positive feedback. So you are actually keeping on building the same tools that you have, regardless of whether they are working or not. Wonderful. Well put. Focus, if you want to comment on anything that is being said right now, go ahead and type exclamation mark. How about 2 exclamation marks? 2 exclamation marks mean that you want to comment on what we are talking right now. So here is a chance for anybody to say anything about the relationship between order and chaos and OODA loop. I'm going to pause for 5 seconds or 10 seconds if anybody wants to say anything more, because I want to make sure that that this is an interactive conversation. Mike, I'll give you 1 minute. Mike, you need to unmute yourself, though. There's no point talking for 1 minute without anybody hearing you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. There's a concept of transfer functions that ties up into control system theory. And Julian Jaynes is really talking about how you integrate inputs into and do some processing in a particular box. And each one of Julian Jaynes's constructs, each one of Jung's archetypes, can be represented as a transfer function or a cascade of transfer functions. Now, there's a real strong literature on how you on how you define and process the mathematics of transfer functions. Now,
Would you, Mike, would you be able to explain what a transfer function is to those who don't know what a transfer function is within a minute?
Yeah, I sure can, but I probably ought to think about it and come back to this
Sure.
in a few minutes.
Sounds good.
But everything, it's essentially the operation on the inputs, an ordered operation on the input that creates a predefined output. And
Okay.
the cascade of those.
Mike, how about this? Because the thing is that I want to make sure that people understand what you're saying. So just take a few minutes, put together something for 1 minute about transfer functions. Okay, I'll come back to you. But I want to follow up on something that you said about Julian Jaynes, right? So let me try to connect the idea.
Let me add one more thing that you could think about in the process.
Go ahead.
This whole concept of evolution, of the evolution of the mind, we've given Julian Jaynes credit for it. There's another name that you can Google who won a Nobel Prize in evolutionary biology, and his name is Gerald Edelman, and he was involved in the field of artificial intelligence.
Look, Mike, let's do one thing. What we are trying to do here is that we're trying to look at ideas which we have already discussed in great amount of detail, and we're trying to see connections between them. The effort required to establish a new idea at this time is, I'm very eager to do that, but not during this meetup.
Not
during this meetup, because here I want to focus on connecting the ideas that we already know. Okay, so thank you, Mike. I have to tell you that I always appreciate your feedback. You're the resident historian. You've been able to add so many different things, but I have to make sure that everything that is being said is understandable by people, and I kind of try to do it in stages. All right. Okay. I just want to say one last thing about the point that Mike was making about Julian Jaynes. So if you look at consciousness, I want to connect that idea of conscious interiority with what we are talking about. Conscious interiority is all about the creating a self-regulatory mechanism. Okay, so otherwise, the mechanism that we have, the stimulus response, is purely system one. It is the one which is completely biased in terms of full of confirmation biases, full of that. Being able to create the mental space where you consider even what you're feeling, even of what your reaction is, and be able to process it in your mental space is a way of rising above that. So it provides that mechanism, a corrective mechanism, a self-consciousness of what you're thinking. You're regarding your thoughts as variables. You're regarding your feelings as variables. You're regarding inputs as variables. You're regarding possible things that you can do as variables, and you're trying to decide between them. So it's a very powerful way of achieving the of moving towards what Boyd aims at, and that is increasing your capacity for independent action regardless of what is going on. So that was just a quick comment. So now let me go back to people raising new connections. So Dave, what two ideas would you like to connect?
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. Kind of relating to what you've been talking to Joe about, but the human development. I was brought up in the Christian church and had always heard the Garden of Eden story. And I know Jordan Peterson talked about the psychological meaning of things in the Bible. So I was interested to hear more of that. But the Garden of Eden story, and then understanding that a very similar story is in Buddhism, of the Buddha and the walled garden. But then what's been interesting is this development of the bicameral brain and whatever, of Jordan Peterson saying that we're almost genetically identical to the chimpanzee, but look at how we've developed. We're, a million times more developed than the chimpanzee. And then thinking about the tree of knowledge, that before that happened, in which I think we all take as a metaphor, but we were really animals. And because we had no concept about the future or mortality, this, that, and the other. But when we started realizing that, that's when we started developing. And now when we're understanding or talking more about the bicameral mind, which I'd never heard that theory before, about how we actually have developed, it's very interesting to me how some of these things are coming together. And I don't know exactly if that's exactly what you meant or not, but that's really what has been fascinating to me that I've been learning over these last few months in several of these meetups that all kind of flow together.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I mean, one of the points, the person who makes it most explicitly is, again, Julian Jaynes. What he's saying is that this jump forward is part of cultural evolution, not biological evolution, that actually this is something that was learned at some point. And you can see that in kids, where they kind of move to the stage of being able to realize that other people have this mental space, and then understand that they themselves have mental space. And that allows them to kind of leave. It's, in a sense, it is very effort intensive. Okay, you lose the innocence of having just reactions. You lose the automatic certainty that you have of an animal, because you can kind of see possibilities. It's the price of kind of taking the responsibility for your life and being able to kind of say, I could do this, or I could do this. What should I work towards? So it is the same issue of moving from, the Garden of Eden out, but it is being done by a cultural development, not an evolutionary development.
And I think it's so tempting to believe that our ancestors were identical to us, and that they are looking at these archaeological scraps to see evidence that no, men were not planning in exactly the ways we do in those days, or even though they weren't writing, they weren't thinking, or things like that. It's very scintillating, those possibilities.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, folks, so you can pick anything. I'm going to start talking about what Hi Hello said. He says, I think these ideas seem to be about things you can control. So let's just talk about that. What is it that you can control? Now, the deepest idea and the simplest idea on that comes from Stoicism, and that's the dichotomy of control, of making a sharp distinction between what you can control and what you can't control. And that's really, for me, it's like 80% of Stoicism, because if you get that, you get pretty much everything. Relating that to, again, Jaynes, is the question of, is basically, control is your mental space, that you can have that mental space. You don't have to, if you look at all the kind of characteristics of what Epictetus says, what you can control, it is all about, what you can do in your mental space, or conscious interiority. Okay, next up is Andrew. Andrew, go ahead.
Sure. Can I bring up a new
Please.
connection? Sure.
Please, yeah.
All right. So there are a lot of things are connected. One of them I can see is the OODA Loop, and Peterson is precise in your speech. And there are a couple of other ones that relate to updating your premises, and basically what ties them all together. It's this idea of essentially creating a sturdy conceptual model of what you think to be reality. So like being precise in your speech, what does that require? That requires kind of like an OODA loop in a way, because you got to you kind of like develop a model, okay, about what you perceive, and then you go back and you re-examine it, right? So you reconstruct your speech, right? Because you're kind of filtering out, you're evaluating the weaknesses and reconstructing it to be more concise, more precise. And it's basically it's almost like an expression of our we're building, right? We like to create, and we're looking to build, kind of solid structures. So, that's part of the fun, I think, of, you making those diagrams. It's kind of like, it's an iterative process. You're building it, you have your conceptual model, you're putting it down, and by putting it down, you're identifying places where things aren't connecting quite right? You're identifying, and you kind of reconstruct things. So a lot of these ones it's really about like, it's embracing the idea that one of our core drives is to create. It's like, that's what we're here for. That's my belief. And so it all kind of fits into that. We want to create things that are solid.
Wow, beautifully put, beautifully put. So I have a lot of things to say about it, but anybody wants to talk about this particular thing, points that Andrew made, you're welcome to do that. Just type an exclamation mark. So, I mean, this is a huge point. I think I've realized that feedback loops are crucial for everything, kind of internal feedback loops and external feedback loops. So for example, writing, the role of writing in developing this loop of kind of externalizing it so you can view it. Speaking out. So I speaking out my ideas, or you speaking out your ideas, and getting feedback from other people. Actually acting on your ideas. And one of the ideas that Jordan Peterson talks about is pursue your values. So even if you don't know your values very well, pursue your values, because it is in that process that you're going to discover the limits of what we need to do. So that's you. Laura, you had a point about the OODA loop and this thing. You need to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
I'm trying to visualize this, and I keep going back to sort of when I was in school, we had to do, pictures of the, in chemistry, of neon, and how we, anyway, I sort of have this image that you create this structure that has these loops, and on these loops, you could put these various things, and you put them on and you see how they interact and so forth. So there are lots of them, and I can't exactly describe how it would all go, but okay, I want to look at this, so I'm going to put this on, and I want to look at how that interacts and how this interacts and how this interacts.
Laura,
and
how about drawing this on a piece of paper and showing it to us?
I guess I'll try.
Okay, let's do that.
I don't know if I have the capability, but
yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be precise, but you can just draw lines which kind of try to capture it. I think that would be a good way of doing that. All
okay.
right. Next one is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Just briefly, building on what Andrew had just talked about, is one of the other concepts that kind of fits into what Peterson, OODA Loop, and the idea of why we're here, is a link between that and outwitting the devil and the idea of definite purpose, and how that relates to values and actions based out of that process. So that's just one other thing. Like when Andrew was explaining how this is all connected into, why we're here, into like kind of rediscovering a reality. If I'm not capturing what he said eloquently, but it related to purpose, to definite purpose. In addition to that, that's one connection that I could just make off the top of my head.
Thanks. I want to follow up on one more thing, one more phrase that Andrew used, and that is a sturdy model. And that's a very interesting phrase, because Like most people think, when they think of sturdy, they think of like a solid wall. But when you look at a sturdy model here, it is really the responsive model which keeps on changing with the new input. So the sturdiness is actually built from the fact that it can interact with the surroundings, and its basic structure remains the same while accommodating changes, something like that. So it's like that sturdiness is very different from what people think sturdiness is, because what happens is that many of the ideals that people hold are Platonic ideals. This one is not. This entire approach that we're talking about is, for the lack of better word, Aristotelian or scientific, or so there is this continuous back and forth between concepts and percepts, between models and experience. It is pragmatic in the sense that it is all for the sake of living. It is for the sake of creating. And what forms that are formed are the ones that make creation possible. In some ways, like the Platonic ideal is a very static ideal. It is like immovable things. You're trying to go towards immovable things. Because life is not like that. Life is action. And that's what you're trying to build on. You're trying to increase your capacity for action, as John Boyd says. You're trying to create a form that follows function. And the forms have to keep on changing with the function for them to be living forms. Otherwise, as soon as they stop responding to function, they start to die and they start to kill the function. Next up is Brian. Brian, go ahead.
So the one of my interests, underlying interests, is one of them is freedom, which I'm not really focusing on, but the other one is agreement and cooperation instead of a lot of the stress on competition and combat. And it's driven off of the idea that there's more, that if we take Jordan Peterson's concept of moving from basically the hero's quest, moving out of one model into another, from perception to reconception. My reconception leads to different behaviors or different actions. And then my actions become part of the unknown, part of the environment to somebody else. So there's not only me involved in this quest, but there are others involved in the exact same quest. And if we assume for the moment that they're both doing it the way Jordan Peterson describes, then there's going to be some interaction that would lead to a convergence or agreement where each person's actions are, quote, the unknown, or the disruptions are the potential chaos for others, which need to be incorporated. The same would be true in the OODA loop with the, if there's two people, there's two OODA loops interacting with each other. I think that they would tend towards, given the models you've laid out, they would tend towards convergence and agreement.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. So let's talk about this. So again, in the context of OODA loops, so let's look at what John Boyd says about this, because he talks about it explicitly in his paper, Destruction and Creation. So what he's saying is that each of the individuals, everybody is trying to increase their capacity for independent action. Now, what happens when such individuals interact? So there are two possibilities, not one, two possibilities. One is that the other person is going to actually help you increase your capacity for independent action through cooperation. So whenever there is a win-win interaction, there is that, like both people are able to do much more as a result of acting together. But there are situations where it is win-lose, where somebody is trying to take something away from you, where it is a win-lose kind of situation where there is competition. So there is both kind of cooperation and competition in life. Now the question is, we can look at the nature. I mean, you're focused on cooperation, so we can look at, the nature of that. Let me see. I don't know how to proceed. This is actually a very interesting question, because we are social beings. We have a lot to gain from each other. So we can look at, for example, let's go into example. Look at the example of this meetup so far, or all the meetups that we do, right? What are we doing? Is it all of us are trying to learn things, and in the process, we are explicating what we know. And we are carefully hearing what the other person is saying. And we are going back and forth, trying to figure out what they are saying, okay, I disagree with this one, but I agree with this one. And in the process, whatever ideas that we have, we are kind of, it's like having several probes around your ideas that allow you to kind of say, oh, this expands naturally in this direction. Oh, this is the limit of it. If I don't have this, so you are actually discovering more of the limits of your ideas through interaction, even when there is, disagreement of ideas. But all of this presupposes some things. All of this presupposes that people here are interested in that. That is not universal. And what I found is that the 4 rules that I have is to try to say, because there are people whose purpose in conversation is something else. So for example, there are people who simply want to show that they are better than other people. Or there are people who simply have some idea and they just want to talk about it, regardless of anybody else, or regardless of what the situation is. None of these things if these kind of people are going to reduce the value of the meetup for everybody. So it is not true that it is universal. So you have to kind of identify under what conditions cooperation produces greater value. So for example, if somebody came and started just yelling, I would just remove them from the meetup, because they are competing. They're actually reducing each of our capacity for increasing our capacity for independent action, because it's a waste of time. It is reducing our capacity. So there is a distinction between competition and cooperation. But within the cooperation, I think cooperation, by putting your ideas and your skills against other skills, you can discover both your strengths and your weaknesses, places where the combination of those skills produce greater net results than what you could do yourself. So those are my, that's what I think. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I like that, especially the last idea where the combination leads to greater net result. I definitely like that. And
Wonderful.
Also understanding that there are conditions necessary for cooperation.
Wonderful, thank you. All right. So does anybody want to propose to talk about any other 2 ideas? You can pick any 2 and talk about them. You can go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk. All right, then I will continue with some. Let's see, which ones shall I pick? Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
Okay, another one is facing fear. I don't know where that's. Oh yeah, you have that there. Is number 3. Facing fear And I'll go back, combine this with OODA Loop, but like I said, it goes to other ones too. And this is basically about the concept that what you believe kind of shapes your perception of things. Like for the OODA Loop, for example, we talk about the negative part of the negative loop, the feedback loop, right? So you go and you have an experience, you gather knowledge through experience, you've formulated some ideas that kind of like narrows your vision. So you're not able to see things that are in front of you, right? So basically that's your belief affecting your perception. In this case, it's your knowledge, it's your belief system that doesn't allow you to see new things. That's kind of, there's an overlap with facing fear, because you might have a certain, and actually this feeds into Peterson a bit, and that is that what do I want to say here? Give me a second. It's kind of like the unknown is frightening, basically. I don't have this totally articulated yet, but so let me leave it there. Let me get back to that.
Sure. I mean, facing fear is a very interesting, and makes me think of one other theme that keeps coming up that we did not list here, is the mismatch between our evolutionary heritage and our modern life. So for example, fear in social context is, whenever we have discussed fear, it is mostly fear in the social context, which is the most intense. And that is based on the fact that, in the evolutionary context, if you are thrown out of your tribe, that would mean death to you. And you still feel that way regarding rejection. But modern context is different. There are millions of people around you, and one particular rejection that really doesn't hurt you that much. But your fear still reacts the same way. And that is another kind of theme that we keep coming up with all the time. So hi, hello, asks, sorry for being an amateur, but what is the goal of combining these concepts? So firstly, hi, hello, I know that you've been here only like one or two times actually. So firstly, these concepts are not just kind of arbitrary ideas that we are discussing. We have actually done several meetups on each of those things. And all of us have thought deeply about each of these ideas for a long time. Okay, so and what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to look at those ideas and try to see kind of commonalities. For example, OODA Loop, or we've done like maybe 20 meetups on Carl Jung, maybe 5 meetups on OODA Loop, maybe 20 meetups on fear, about 15 meetups or 25 meetups on Stoicism, something like that. And what we're trying to do is that we are remembering all, and many of us have attended all these meetups, and we are trying to actually connect everything that we have learned in that. So that's what we are trying to do. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I'll just say really quickly to that also, in addition to that, is that it allows us to take some of these concepts and to see what their value is in their purest form, and then to apply them to another domain, which actually provides you with a new insight. And so it provides you with some general principles that you can then use to develop a richer way of thinking. And so one example would be looking at how Julian Jaynes looks at consciousness and how Carl Jung looks at consciousness, and then how your mental space kind of figures into this entire process and how that fits into decision making. So once you see all that, you're deconstructing it and you're seeing it in its purest form. And for me, the reason that's so valuable is because it's like principles. You start stating them in their most simplistic form, then you can apply them across other domains and start to see what is the most simple way approaching a problem. So.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by Jeff. Paul. Paul, you had something to say?
Sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm on my phone, which is not my usual mode. I have a connection that's also a question or a hypothesis that is relating Stoicism to the concepts of the space that you talk about, the mental space. And I mean, there was a sort of maybe a preconception I have or would like to have that evil, I'm really getting at the essence of good and evil, and that evil is really sort of ignorance in some form. And it's because someone hasn't made that leap that Jordan Peterson and others talk about and understood something. But I'm looking at it differently maybe now, in that someone can have the mental space, someone can completely be evolved into this new cultural mode. Someone can completely know that they want to increase their ability to act in the world, OODA Loop style. And what is missing are the virtues of Stoicism. Otherwise, they might use all that knowledge and extreme understanding of human nature and everything else to increase their personal power, because there's not a connection in modern minds to the virtues or some other moral basis. And Joe and others talk about how you have a very ethical, moral approach to this, where you try to increase the greater good by individual things. But one can operate in the world with extreme sophistication and just not have that approach. So that's my thought or question.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I was thinking about it because I'm studying Thomas Aquinas and his view of psychological faculties. And I was comparing it to Carl Jung's approach, or more precisely, not even Carl Jung's approach, the way in which Carl Jung's psychological functions are dealt with today. Okay. So this is both on psychology. Okay. So this is just the nature of human psychology. You know, what is going on in us with these two different giants? Not really two different. So it's Thomas Aquinas and way in which Carl Jung's functions are used today. And the missing part is morality. Missing part is, what are you trying to do? And is it good or is it not good? That concept is kind of missing in the modern culture. A modern culture is subjectivist. And that has not always been the case. For example, Stoicism is very much about virtue. Aquinas is all about virtue, and there are people who have differed on what virtue is, but they hold that virtue is worthwhile. Now, unfortunately, much of modern thinking is subjectivist, which simply says do what you feel like, which is basically like a stimulus response kind of a machine. So absolutely, I mean, this issue of morality is very deep, and I have not explicitly tackled it. It's there implicitly in everything that we have done, but I have not explicitly tackled it. And I think I might want to do that. So that's that, and that'll be very interesting and very challenging things to do. So, for example, you can see the morality in people like John Boyd. You know, the moral principle is that you're trying to increase your capacity for independent action. Corollary of that is that you cooperate with people who are in the win-win mode, who will increase, who you work with. I mean, military, the people that you work with are like your families. Okay, they are like your brothers, because you depend on them and they depend on you. So cooperation is very deeply understood in that context, because you cannot really function effectively without that. At the same time, there is reality of the fact that somebody else is trying to kill you. So this difference between good and evil is apparent. And one small point I would make is that, people, the issue of, what is evil? The view that you talked about is, Socrates' view, because it's all about not knowing. I think mostly it is the root of it is not lack of knowledge, but evasion, because lack of knowledge can be corrected. If you can learn, it is kind of refusing to see and kind of stepping away all the time from anything that is uncomfortable. I think that, as best as I know, that's the root. So Paul, I've commented a lot on what you've said. So so any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. You're on the same track. And that last thing you said is my debate in my mind. It's almost like that view that it's evasion and not wanting to look at what you don't. I'm questioning that a bit and saying, no, the person is going to look as deeply, as hard as they can at everything that's hard for them to face, with the goal of amassing personal power over everyone. And it's not evasion. They're actually going to conquer their own demons in order to conquer the world. That's what evil is. It's just a question. It's a hypothesis.
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up is going to be Jeff, Brian, and Laura. Jeff.
Well, wow, Paul and Shrikant. You sort of got to the heart of what I'd like to offer as a connection. I'm not even sure that I can say it as articulately as I wish, so I just want to try something here. So, I'm very impressed with form follows function, and with destruction and creation, and with moral purpose, and that the quality of the answers we get, I believe, are directly related to the quality of the questions we ask. But my experience is that the questions evolve. And so in some ways, the functions evolve. And allowing my functions, my intentions, my understanding of what is right to evolve, really allowing my sense of purpose to evolve, is then what really stimulates and catalyzes the need to then allow my sense of the functions, of the forms, to evolve. So the real questions here are not just, changing the form. The deepest questions are about allowing the functions to change, and my sense of them, and whatever I think are the highest and greatest purposes to be achieved. Anyway, that's some of the connecting the dots for me. But I think that they are related to, for me in the end, I'll close with this. For me, during the last couple of years that we've been doing this together, for me, the sense of purpose and sort of what's right and true has become, in many ways, balancing things, like balancing freedom and responsibility, balancing independence and interdependence. For me, I've come to see the worth of looking to achieve those kinds of balance. And but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jeff. let's see. So Jeff, I mean, we have slightly different ways of approaching these things. So one of the things that I try to do, your approach is very much kind of modern approach. My approach is kind of more old fashioned. What I try to do is that even when things are changing, what I'm trying to do is to find out what remains the same through the change. And that is what I'm focused on. It's the principles, it's the laws. There is a lot of change, and the focus is always on the law. So it's a question of kind of subjectivist versus kind of this kind of what shall I say? So for example, in John Boyd, the function always remains the same. It's all about always increasing your capacity for independent action. Similarly, for Louis Sullivan, functions always remains the same. You're trying to live. Same thing for Aquinas, same thing for Aristotle. So in spite of that remaining the same, the core function or purpose remaining the same, it allows for infinite variety of things based on context. So it's very differently put together than how you see it. So any thoughts?
Well, I'll have to consider that. It's an interesting thought. But you're right. I actually am, I am open to function evolving. And so that's very insightful. Thank you for that. You know, regarding my own way of thinking, you're right. I'm open to even letting function evolve.
Right. So what I'm saying is that, you know, we're talking about very deep ideas, but all ideas have consequences. So, you know, different formulations or different ways in which we hold ideas have consequences. And it's important to know what the consequences are. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Brian, Laura, and Kevin. Brian.
Well, first of all, I like very much what you and Jeff were discussing. I don't want to gloss over that. But I think it's kind of the difference between relativity and some sort of absolutism, if I might put it that way. Rather simply, the thing that really piqued my interest was Paul's comment and Srikant's evaluation or response to it. I have found that fascinating because in my work at the university, this was the question I was confronting at the end of my work, and I've come to terms with it, but I think it definitely is an open question as to, you know, what is good and what is bad. Just a couple comments. I definitely think that's a tough topic, but I'd be willing to spend more time on it. But you use the loop, OODA Loop, which was developed in a military context. Yeah, people are trying to kill you, and you're trying to kill other people. So that, you know, that kind of limits the range of cooperation. There's cooperation within the team and without. And then you can lapse over. I don't know how this would obviously lapse from the combat into negotiation. But I've been thinking more in the business context, and it's really high for decades now. And it's very similar because you have these business executives who are very top, you know, teams, these different teams, decision-making teams, are in a very close-knit community, a very tight team. And believe me, you cannot tell them that what they're doing, once they've made a decision, what they're doing is not good. they are convinced it is good. They would not do it if they didn't think it was good. And because they're doing it, it is good. So that's not going to work if you want to try to get at some, some useful, I guess, definition of purpose. You can be on the outside and be judgmental and condemn them, but you can also look at what they're doing and recognize that maybe what they're doing is not good because, and gets into this absolutism versus relativism. These people are just out to maximize profit, and even beyond that, maximize their own individual return from being managers in the company. And they're fine with that. They're even fine with just maximizing their own personal return without regard to the return in the company. And you know what? They think that's good. So a way to get at that is to bring them around to the idea, if possible, or the only solution I've really found for that, put it this way, is to get them to recognize that other people might not see that as good. And the way to get at what good might be, or a better understanding of good, is through discussion and agreement with larger groups. And the larger groups I pointed them to is everyone involved, affected, and concerned by the decisions they make. Because in business right now, people get in these rooms, really they make decisions in isolation, and they're making decisions that affect a lot of other people. And sometimes people, they think it's always good, and sometimes other people think it is bad. And the only way to get around that I can see, is that there's some discussion of what's good and bad before the decision is made and implemented. So it's a discursive approach. It's a process to determining what's good and bad. The last thing I'll say is that, and I can't get it beyond that, because if you try to get beyond that with some kind of principle other than this discursive principle, you're starting to look like that team of managers who is convinced that they're right and will not consider other viewpoints. And the last thing I'd say is that good and bad is not black and white. There is good, better, best. And I think if you really delve into decisions, at least spend a lot of time looking at decision making in a business context, and I don't think anybody would disagree that it is black. Nobody would agree that it's black and white. It is shades of gray, or even different colors. So the better way to think about it is good, better, best. I think, not good or bad.
Thank you, Brian. So I'll just say a couple of things. One is that there are two issues here. One is what person considers when he thinks of maximizing or increasing their capacity for independent action. Some people have a very narrow view of that, and some people have a much broader view of that. And so it's kind of like enlightened self-interest versus very restrictive self-interest. Very restrictive self-interest is all about making kind of short-term gains in a very small situation. It's always it's thought of as kind of zero-sum game. They're trying to do that, versus that it's possible to expand the pie itself, something like that. So it's like that conception varies in scope. So that's one point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that there is always the groupthink that people are just kind of feeding off a certain, within a company or something like that. They kind of just keep rotating the ideas amongst themselves. Just like you can do it within your own head, you can do it within a group, whereas you just don't listen to anything else. And you kind of have to run into the wall to find out, oh, we're going the wrong way. So those are the only 2 points, but it just, fascinating observations. Thank you, Brian. Next up is going to be Laura, Kevin, Hai, and Andrew. Laura.
Okay, this goes back a little bit in conversation, but it was being discussed that when solutions weren't as people believe they should be or whatever, that there was a strong, attitude of just, I forget what the word was, but it was basically saying of great displeasure, you know, that there was, that people were upset by that. And I know that I'm not using exactly what the individual said, and excuse me for that, but it hit me that we were talking about that the other day in education, you know, with solutions, and how that it's okay not to get the right answer, and look at that, in today's world, we're still dealing with that same thing. So I was wondering if that becomes, if that, you know, becomes like an inherent trait in over time, you know, that such that it becomes something that, you know, is embedded in our mentality, and our, you know, we can't get rid of it almost, you know.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you, Laura. So this is the point that we talked about from Buckminster Fuller in Mystique, where what you're trying to do, I mean, that was a fantastic example, by the way, that CJ talked about, the essay Mystique, because what it was saying was that in education, we focus on, we reward people for getting the right answers. And they're just like circus animals, you know, saying, okay, these are the hoops you jump through. But what can you do as a result of it? Not much. Whereas what Buckminster Fuller is arguing is that what really matters is to actually acknowledge your own mistakes. So people keep track and of how many times you were wrong, that you realize that you were wrong, because this is again about kind of, you know, conscious mental space of being, again, you know, kind of working against your confirmation bias. And the more you can do that, the more you have the capacity of learning. That is very different. So what you're really building is capacity to learn, not knowledge, because knowledge is not that useful. It's actually very easy to get knowledge, but it's not going to be of any use to you, because it is only your ability to kind of continuously apply your knowledge, such as it is, take the feedback from the world and update it. If you're not open to doing that, because what happens is that moment you start saying that I want to be perfect, immediately there is the flip side of it, is that you're going to try to push away any thought of saying that, okay, I'm not perfect. You're going to push away that thought. Whereas what you want is that you want to actually embrace and look for places where you are weak. Look at what you don't know. So very good point, Laura. Next up is Kevin. Hi, Andrew and Joe. Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Frank. I like the way you put everything together, blend them together. You know, from different output, input, then idea, perspective.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah. For me, every time, even single word, let's say time, that's how amazing session that time, right? An ideal self with multiple session, and failure, mistake, evil, those like we turn on negative words, we turn to very back to neutral. So that's amazing. I would say for me, I learned, like, let's say for ourselves, we see that we need internal validation, external. Actually, we even internal, we need also positive, negative. And also your attitudes. Actively, you get feedback and feed to your action again. And then you with OODA Loop do, you know, action. Here's my takeaway. You know, overall, it's like we try to find the origin. Like we things like we distracted by technology, and you know, we get everything better than before. We lost what's the original thought come from, what's our original consciousness. And the one thing I would say, we need develop kind culture. It's evolution is produce a pattern of relationship among layer is tree-like. It's not a ladder-like, not linear. Like it's not, let's see, we could see one culture or one individual, you can dominate, certain time, certain area, but it's not the way for long term. Let the individual explore them own self, let them make their own choice, learn each other, live a little bit. People living for reasons, for reasons make the choice for themselves the time being. I'll stop here now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. I just want to follow up on the idea of ladder versus almost like a web, where you kind of start out in many directions, and many of them actually fail. And so the process of growth is like that. I mean, in evolution, it is blind in the sense that it's just random, but even, consciously, you have to realize that you have to be aware that many of the ideas that you come up with are going to die. And you have to be, and it's hard because it's like, you invest a lot of energy in the ideas. You have emotions, you have thoughts, you have habits that you've built on those. And it's, as Jordan Peterson says, it's kind of like letting part of you die. But you need that in order to grow. And so that is part, that kind of negative pruning is crucial part. And in many ways, kind of getting rid of, kind of removing things from your life that are not working is probably, I found it to be much more having much greater impact on my life than adding positive things. Because what it does is that it creates space for positive things. Next up is going to be hi, hello.
Sorry, I can respond to that.
Yes, Becky, want to add?
Oh, just a second. Okay, okay, Becky, you can go ahead and comment on it, and then hi, hello. Becky, go ahead.
Going back to what you were saying about killing off the options, I wanted to tie that back with Bayes' theorem, and having those options die off gives you new probabilities for your remaining options, as well as having new information about what failed, tying it back to Bucky's mystique, to help you learn, and then course correcting through cybernetics.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. All right. Hi, hello. Go ahead.
Hi, you can skip me. Sorry.
Okay. Next up is going to be, let me see who's next. Next is going to be Andrew, followed by Joe. Andrew.
Okay, one thing, and I've noticed this before, a couple of themes that connect many of these categories together that you touch on in 52 Labs. Two things, I think. One, most all of them is an underlying requirement of the believing in evolution. So evolution is like one of the core kind of principles that underlie like everything here. And that basically so much of who we are is shaped by evolutionary adaptation and cultural influence. And that's all kind of the backbone. And then on top of that, it's like a recognition of that, but then also kind of a belief in something more divine, which is that despite all of these kind of limitations, if you will, we have a much higher potential, something unreal, as yet unrealized. So I think those two things are, it's a lot of, all of these things kind of rest on those ideas.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. I mean, the thing is that there is a center, something towards which you are aiming. Like, for example, Boyd calls it, increasing your capacity for action. And you're going round and round. You're doing all kinds of things, and you're correcting all kinds of things. But that's what is kind of increasing at the same time. Aristotle puts it in different ways. He calls it the Eudaimonia. The Stoics look at it as virtue. And it's very interesting that if you are actually doing that, for example, if you're actually engaging in this OODA loop relentlessly, or you are maintaining this mental space relentlessly, or you are living using this dichotomy of control relentlessly, in a sense, in that moment, you're already there. It's kind of like, it's, yes, there is a progression, but then there is kind of a human experience of being kind of fully alive, fully moving towards your goal. And you kind of have an experience of being there at the same time. It's almost like a artistic experience or aesthetic experience. That's what art does for you. Like when you actually experience the feeling of what it would be like at the end of where you're trying to go, something like that. So there are a whole bunch of things. The idea of mindfulness. You spent a lot of time on the concept of mindfulness, right? And that's, again, these are very powerful ways of kind of making, so I want to distinguish between two things. One is that there is something that remains constant. It's like a spiral. So it's not a circle, you're kind of going in a circle, but it is kind of building on itself. So I think spiral is a very good kind of metaphor for that. The second point I was trying to make, which is a very difficult point to make, is that if you're virtuous, in the sense that if you're relentlessly trying to improve, that is actually the best you can do, and that's all you can do. So in that sense, kind of being fully mindful, being fully focused, being fully purposeful with a definite purpose, in that moment itself, you're kind of living the ideal life as best as is possible to you. So something like that. I don't know whether I'm making, whether it is clear. Andrew, you get what I'm talking about at all? Or does this make any sense?
I mean, it sounds to me like you're referring to the fact that we are we're striving towards becoming more of closer to our potential. We're striving to get to our potential. I think that's what something along those lines.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is Joe.
I mean, Becky captured what I was kind of going to comment on so beautifully that I almost don't want to say. It was the idea of like questions, but I'm trying to connect it to micro-incisive to macro-comprehensive, and the importance of questions within that framework. But the way she was talking about the idea of Bayes' theorem, I'm trying to wrap that into that as well, as far as reorienting. But so the example that I was thinking about, and I had been thinking about since last week, is when people were talking about the treatment of patients and the idea of there is the idea of being micro-incisive is you're treating the problem of if you develop a medication, right, to solve a particular problem, but you're not necessarily thinking about the comprehensive approach of what the problem that is the underlying problem being solved. And like the macro comprehensive impact on the body as a whole. So that even though you're solving an underlying problem, the importance of questions and understanding, like to keep questioning in that process what the problem that you solved, it kind of relates back to, I'm trying to think about how to say this. Like it's I'm just not expressing myself correctly right now.
Sure. Can I say something about the macro comprehensive and micro comprehensive? Okay. So that's a very powerful idea of Buckminster Fuller, and that's definitely one of the ideas that we'll be talking about next Tuesday. So next Tuesday, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do this connecting the dots on comprehensivism. So all the comprehensivist ideas that we have discussed in Comprehensivist Wednesdays, or any other idea that allows you to go across fields. So that is only those ideas that we're going to pick up. This idea of macro comprehensive and micro incisive, the best I understand it, is that you learn everything. You go broad, and at the same time, whenever you're doing anything, whatever you're doing, you bring all of it to bear on this one point, which is the incisive part. So it's micro incisive. So that means not only that you should be able to range across fields, but you should be able to bring all the knowledge that you have to bear on any particular point that you're doing it, because that's actually what it means to know things. So to use again, John Boyd's approach is that it's all about action. It's your capacity of action. So micro comprehensive, micro incisive, that means you are actually achieving the efficacy of your action, your capacity for action. And in order to do that, you have to be macro comprehensive in the sense that you have to reorient continuously using the widest input of data. So the reorientation part, and being open to all the feedback that you're getting is about being comprehensive in putting together the picture. But moment you do that, you start to move, decide, and act, which is the micro comprehensive. So you can see how profound that idea of OODA loop and John Boyd says, because this is just, so to him, it's like macro comprehensive is going up and micro incisive is going down. And that's just the loop. So, and it makes perfect sense. Next up is going to be Laura, Kevin, and Becky. Laura.
I guess I was just thinking in some ways that it's not perfect. And I think that sometimes these things collide, that they don't, it's not one all the way and then the other all the way, so there's collisions that sort of happen and that motivate, that point, and that then gets you moving upward or downward, depending on how well you use it. When I was trying to come up with my model here, I discovered that, it's a lot of construction to make it work. I almost started thinking maybe we ought to just use the geodesic dome and play with it for a while, because it seemed more appropriate for the need of this conversation. But I just kept thinking, okay, we'll do this, and we're going to hit a bump here because, even in this micro macro, they're thinking of everything to do with this vaccine, except for that they forgot about this population. It's never enough comprehensive, so anyway, that's what I was thinking. So you hit that bump when you think you're also comprehensive, and then you forget this little micro group down here, and it doesn't work out so smoothly.
Thank you. So I would say this thing about I'll just comment on the comment about the bumps. I think the bumps are very important to notice that you have had a bump. That's very important, because most people will drive over that bump and say, what bump? and the bump is there. And you can't really, get away from that. So I think being aware of that as you go on. And that's the part of, that's again part of the methods that we're talking about, like the OODA Loop. It's all about being responsive to those things and fixing them. Next up is going to be Kevin, Becky, and Paul. Kevin.
I got a 2 point. A lot. We talk about a trend and a pattern related. For example, about language from Brian. It's from oral, scribble, and print to electric and digit. After digit, what's next? Maybe it's just that's kind of
Kevin, we don't even know what digital is.
Yeah.
What are you talking about next?
I mean, I like those topic that's open my mind. And second one is system thinking and comprehensive polymath integration. We talked about polymath integration of a specialist and generalist. That's that's basically we need to put systematically solution. It's one thing, one angle you can solve the problem. Linear thinking doesn't work.
Wonderful, thank you. So I want to follow up on this idea of the digital. Okay, I mean, and that's the reason I'm very excited about the work that the Center for the Study of Digital Life is doing. I really don't know what this digital world is and what it is doing. Now, I know a lot of things about it, but it's clear that it is making possible things that we could not even dream of, and they are already here. At the same time, most of us are proceeding like creatures of habit, based on how the world was when we grew up or something like that. Or at least, we are at least 20 years behind our times, though we think we are living today. I think the future is already here and things are completely different. I mean, if you want to see examples of that, just look at kids. Look at a 5-year-old use an iPhone, and you are going to be astonished because they use it better than you do. Because it's like, for them, it is native. But the other point is that each of these mediums makes possible a different way of being human, and in order to make the most of a medium, we need to understand who we are as human beings better. Because currently the way we think of ourselves as human beings is conditioned by whatever mediums we have gotten used to using. We are just using them mindlessly, whether it is watching, it's like I'm always astonished when I hear the statistics. Americans watch 4 hours of TV per day. Okay, I mean, what is that? I don't know what it is and what it means. Okay, how is it possible? It's like, what's going on? I have no idea what's going on. Okay, there are all these books out there. Okay, they used to have a certain kind of influence. The oral medium that we are able to do with Zoom, what is this? This is something really remarkable. I think it's good, but I don't know what it is, what we are doing here on Zoom. Okay, we are able to connect to each other as if we were sitting in the living room in some ways, but we are geographically separated, but we are highly selective in the sense that we are here in a particular place because we share certain values, which was not really possible. Even in a place like New York, it was very hard for me to put together. People would marvel at saying, okay, what is this thing that you put together? How is it possible that you get all these random great people just showing up? Okay, so I think we don't know much about what this digital thing is. And I'm really, really curious to figure it out. And I think these people, especially Mark, I mean, I've never seen anybody that, it's like that forward thinking and that original. Okay. I mean, he's a very original thinker, which is very, very rare. So I'm really looking forward to that series. And we're going to go back to Aquinas this Sunday. I've been preparing for that. That's going to be very challenging. And we're going to go from there. Next up is going to be Becky and Paul. Becky.
Okay, I'm going to be ambitious and
Please.
tie up Carl Jung's Individuation, Order and Chaos, Attention, Facing Fears, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules, and then Individuality and Socialness.
All right.
So with Carl Jung's Individuation, oftentimes, well, most of it is about integrating the shadow, figuring out what is on the cusp of the order and chaos, what is known, what is unknown to you. And it's about paying attention to your dreams through archetypes that reveal themselves, also to your emotions. And so part of that would be facing your fears and confronting what may have been repressed. And so when you integrate the shadow, you're acknowledging all these less attractive attributes that you have, but being able to master them and bring them in. And now tying it back to Jordan Peterson's 12 rules, rule 6, if I may read just a tiny.
Please.
Perhaps you will discover that your now less corrupted soul, much stronger than it might otherwise have been, is now able to bear those remaining necessary, minimal, inescapable tragedies. Perhaps your uncorrupted soul will then see its existence as a genuine good, as something to celebrate, even in the face of your own vulnerabilities. Perhaps you will become an even more powerful force for peace and whatever is good. And so you become whole, more whole with the shadow work, and tying it to individuality and socialness. He's saying, start with yourself, fix yourself, be the best you can be. And then if everyone else were to do the same, we can all make this place better. And so just one more tiny snippet. Perhaps you will then see that if all people did this in their own lives, the world might stop being an evil place. After that, with continuous effort, perhaps it could even stop being a tragic place. Who knows what eternal heavens might be established by our spirits, purified by truth, aiming skyward, right here on the fallen earth. So.
Wow. Well, thank you, Becky. This was amazing. I want to build on. So you have the way I have diagrammed it is that I have this entire constellation of points about paying attention to the shadow and how it transforms you. So, and there it is, facing chaos versus order, facing your fear, so that's one constellation of points I have. The second theme that you have is individual and social. So I just want to talk about the connection between the first constellation and the second one. Okay. So I think one of the things that I really like about our meetups, this was absolutely true for our New York meetups, and I think this has happened here too. What happens is that our shadow is our shadow, in the sense that there are a lot of things that we are not paying attention to. There are just a lot of things we're not paying attention to. And we go about our business focusing on things that we are more conscious of, that we are more focused on. We're just focused on that. Now, what happens is that, and this is the principle that we talked about from Carl Rogers and that of authentic relating. What happens is that when you are actually listening to another human being, you find, and they are listening to you, but more importantly, let's take both sides, okay? So when you are listening to them, and if you're actually listening to them, like most people are never listen to people. They never listen. They never listen to themselves. They never listen to other people, okay? But if you actually are listening to other people, you realize things that you have completely missed about human experience. You suddenly like say, oh, I didn't know this was there, that this was a thing, that this is like, because we are all different. The beautiful thing is that whatever we are focused on what our shadow is, we have very large shadows, right? We have very large shadows, things that we are not aware of. The same is true for all, let's say the second person. But if both are actually trying to see each other because something is conscious to them, you will become aware of that in you if you're actually open to another person, and vice versa. So it's a very effective way of throwing a little light, however dim, on your shadow. Again, you have to again choose to look. But it is easier to actually spot it in another person, see it in another person. In order for this to happen, there are prerequisites. And that's a kind of a level of trust and level of kind of benevolence, level of respect for truth, a level of honesty that all parties need to have. But if you have that, it's a very powerful tool for personal growth. And this is actually whatever I'm saying is just Carl Rogers' point about authentic relating. So it's the authentic relating is the connection between the point that you made about kind of paying attention to your shadow and how an individual can gain from society in the process. I recommend, Carl Rogers a lot just for that concept, authentic relating. It's a very profound concept. But thank you, Becky. That was fantastic. Thanks. Next up is Paul.
Hi, that's a good segue to thread some more things together as I listen to this whole conversation, particularly, I think it was Brian's point about management teams and what Becky just said. And so another take on what makes people not be the person that you're describing, Srikant. And I went back in my mind as we were talking about the cardinal virtues and thought about the fact that they didn't work, meaning human history had lots and lots of groups strongly believing in those virtues, doing evil to one another. But so that makes me think that threading it with another concept, Srikant, who said they count how many times they're wrong?
That was Buckminster Fuller.
Okay, so tying that in. So the thing that is missing from this idea of the cardinal virtues save one from evil is I could be wrong. I could be wrong, because if you say I could be wrong, for instance, the Crusades would never have happened, because they go, we're not going to kill all these people because they're not trained Christian, because we could be wrong. We're just going to promote things in different ways. But I'm just hypothesizing about this, tying the Bucky Fuller thing to what is it missing in a person? Is it that they don't see their shadow, as Becky just described? Is it, and what I'm also getting at is it's fantastic to be able to use this discussion, the way you've presented it, to try to see what problems it solves. So that's what I feel like I'm trying to do here. But I want to point out how hard it is. If we buy into this thing that you need to be able to say I could be wrong, then when it's at your core principle level, how hard it is. For instance, that means in this meetup, we are almost zealous in our conviction about your 4 rules, and we love you and we love them. We have to say, wait, we could be wrong. It could be better to be long-winded, disrespectful, and more might come out. And see how weird that even sounds? But that's what we're asking. You're asking someone to like be very compassionate about their convictions at the same time as part of their mind is going, it could be wrong. So I'm just pointing that out. Thanks.
Excellent point. So let me try to address it. It's a very challenging point to address, but let me go ahead and try to address it. So first thing I want to say is that people who claim to follow virtues or claim to follow ideologies, most of them actually do not understand them. It's a question of, form follows function. Even great ideologies, even great virtues, there are people who kind of formulate it for the first time. Most people just take the forms of it and they wear it like a dress to show off to other people. And that's all that is going on. So to regard them as people who are virtuous, sorry, they are not that. Okay, so that's first point. So what really matters is to actually have the virtues. Most people just are doing kind of virtue signaling. They're trying to pretend to be something because it gives them some social prestige. So that's a completely different phenomena. The virtue that I'm talking about is all about kind of learning, being open to the world. It also, the thing is that it's not about saying that there is a specific way in which this approach says that I could be wrong. And it's best captured by Sapolsky, who holds that you have to have strong convictions weakly held. You have to have strong convictions. Same thing as saying Jordan Peterson saying, pursue your values. You need to say, this is where I am going. Know it explicitly, know it clearly, and hold it weakly in the sense that be open to all the feedback that you're getting about it and keep updating it relentlessly. This is very different from nihilism. Nihilism holds, I can't know anything. Nothing is worth anything. This is very different from nihilism. Modern times are subjectivist and nihilist. Subjectivist in the sense anything that you feel goes. So maybe I'll feel this right now. Maybe I'll feel something another time. This is not that. This is all about relentlessly trying to conceptualize, like Boyd is saying, and relentlessly remaining open to corrections, but not just arbitrary. Saying that this could be true is not part of this philosophy, because that is like arbitrary. You're not saying that anything could be. That is completely giving up on cognition and just going, embracing both kind of skepticism and nihilism. What you're doing, you need to have some evidence to even assert a possibility. So that's also another part of this. So this is very different from this approach that Boyd has, or Darwin has, or, so this approach, or Buckminster Fuller has, or Louis Sullivan has. It is tremendously malleable, but it is principle-based. And those principles are tested every second. And they are tested not by hypothetical, or is it, maybe there is a green ghost on your shoulder. No. You don't look at things like that. You only look at actual facts in order to update. So it's a very different view than, because what has happened is that the intellectual history of the West is dominated by Plato, who held that you need to have direct insight into unchanging ideas. There is a reaction to that, which is skepticism. This is neither Plato nor the skeptics. This is something else, and which has a very different nature. And I think Boyd is a very good example. Louis Sullivan is a very good example. Buckminster Fuller is a good example. And you can read them. You can see in Buckminster Fuller, he talks about mistakes. He also talks about principles. And that is his core approach. So you need to get that, which is a very different view than what you're talking about. So that's what I would say. Any comments, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Really great points, especially, the way you framed it with strong convictions weakly held. I think it makes me understand in a different way what I think is sort of the psychological challenge. You're proposing something that's challenging to most human minds, that thing. So strong convictions weakly held. And what I'd be curious in a meeting room with John Boyd, if he would say that, and if I would say, well, wait, I'm a soldier, I'm being trained to kill for this principle. Am I going to do that while holding it weakly? See, so I'm just saying, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I think it's actually necessary and right, Shakrat, but now our mission has to be to show people how they can live in that world of strong convictions weakly held psychologically. It's not easy for a lot of people.
No, I mean, that's what Boyd did. I mean, if you look at his the briefings, I would recommend the briefing that Chuck Spinney did. He understands all of this. He understands all of this, and he responds to all of it. He has a full theory of that, because what you have is that you not only have explicit convictions, you have implicit convictions, you have implicit habits, you have built it into your muscle memory. All of that is necessary. But on the top of that, you have to be always aware of any kind of mismatches, because your life depends on it. Yes, you are gung-ho, you're going full speed in the battle, in the midst of battle. And on the top of that, you have to be malleable to notice that something is going on that you were not expecting, and rework your approach in facing.
Can I just say one brief thing in response to that?
Please.
I love that, and that makes total sense. But I wonder, and he may address this, but at the meta level, I'm talking about the soldier in Vietnam, and he's learning to react to save his life in all the ways you're talking about, and questioning whether he really sees a tree over there, it's a camouflage soldier or whatever. But he's got to question, weakly hold the principle that he should even be fighting in Vietnam. There's a meta principle.
Now that is,
that's the problem I'm talking about.
Okay, so then, I mean, we're talking about drafted soldiers, right?
Any situation where one is doing a very big thing and has to really have strong conviction in his principle to do it. Not about whether a tree is a person or not. That's a different kind of knowledge versus not knowledge. The meta principle and the faith in it that drives you to be willing to shoot a person.
So, I mean, we're talking about, you're talking about drafted soldiers in Vietnam. And that is certainly, that is certainly an example of, kind of a person being put somewhere against his will, and how that operates in that situation. That's very different. It's a very different issue.
But shouldn't the person who's not drafted and had a strong conviction that he should go to Vietnam also weakly hold it?
You understand what weakly hold means. Okay, it's a strong conviction. Weakly held means does not, okay, weakly held, okay, so let me, maybe you understand, maybe it's not clear what Sapolsky means by strong conviction, weakly held. Strong convictions means you're completely fired up about it. You think this is the right thing. You are doing everything you can. Your emotional mechanism is fully behind it. You are expending all the energy that you can in order to pursue it. So it's not weakly held in that sense that you're talking. It is very strongly held in that sense. So in what sense is it weakly held? Weakly held means that when you see something against it, you do not resist it. You look at it. You are open to correction. It doesn't, you're saying that because it is weakly held, it is not motivated. No, no, no. Motivation comes from the strong convictions. It is fully motivated, strongly motivated. You're pursuing your research as assiduously with the last fiber of your being as you possibly can. That's what it means to hold it strongly. Weakly is being like Kepler, when you have spent 20 years of your life based on the idea of Platonic solids and how everything is put together, and you start seeing data and you give up all of that. That is an example of strong convictions weakly held.
Thank you.
Is that clear?
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't solve everything, but it's a great topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. All right, folks. I think these conversations are working very, very well. I love it. So let me just tell you what I'm going to do next Tuesday. Because I can't do a meetup on Wednesday, I've moved the Wednesday comprehensivist meetup to Tuesday, and I'm going to do just this series on that, connecting the dots. So people can bring up anything from comprehensivists. You can bring up any, we have done more than 60 meetups on comprehensivism. So you look up the playlist for Comprehensivist Wednesdays. You don't have to watch anything. Look at any topic that you find interesting. Watch anything that you find interesting. You'll get more from it. Whatever you remember, you can bring. But more importantly, bring any idea you think allows you to go across fields. So for example, Charlie Munger had this idea of Charlie Munger's tool belt. What his approach was that he would go to different fields to collect general tools. He was interested only in universal tools, but he would go to every field and collect all the general tools. So feel free to bring any general tool that you have found useful. I mean, my number one general tool is form follows function. I can apply it to anything to produce really, really good results in a couple of seconds. So that's my favorite tool. I'm hoping that the Julian Jaynes conscious interiority may overtake that. So I'm hoping. So that's that's saying a lot. So so that's what. So you can come up with your own ideas, as well as you can come up with any ideas. I'm going to put links to the playlist. Maybe I'm going to go through the playlist myself and identify some of the meetups that are particularly effective in thinking about comprehensivism. CJ has done such a fantastic job on this. He has several meetups of that kind. But that's what we're going to do. All right, folks. So thank you very much. Just great conversation. And we will see you soon. Bye.